All right. As of today, my name is David Minehan, and I am here at Woolly Mammoth, and we were talking about the Replacements, and I was in a band called the Neighborhoods from the late 70s to the early 90s, and can vouch for personal testimony of the Replacements live, and also got to play with Paul for a year on his first solo tour.
Cool. And just a legal thing where I'm just going to say, I mean, yes, you were agreeing to be in the film Color Me Obsessed about the band.
I agreed to be in this film, provided it only puts St. Paul in the most glorious, illuminating light.
It will. You know, I mean, I'm sure there'll be a couple of people who are not going to love him, but I think that's like
Oh,
it'll be
wow.
balanced.
Okay.
Yeah.
I drank the Kool-Aid, what can I say?
Yeah. Hey, a lot of us did. Okay, so let's go into your background. And so when you started playing, the first time you heard them, bring your earliest Replacements experience.
Well, I guess, first things you have to say about myself, I grew up in the same time frame as Paul did, or Replacement, Paul, and thereby, as you leave high school in the 77, 78 time frame, and you've been listening to music passionately all along, and you're trying to find your way in the world, and not being very good at academics or any collegiate direction. You are picking up guitars about the same time, and playing stuff you like to play, and if you're lucky to find the right three chords, you step into another domain that's playing music for a living somehow. And unbeknownst to me, countless other bands, of course, were doing this, but making our name for ourselves, the Neighborhoods in Boston, from 78 into 79 and 80, and you hear of other counterparts around the country who were deriving influences and inspirations from the same wells and gaining some notoriety, and we'd been lucky to kind of establish ourselves in a quick, accelerated sort of way around Boston, and had lots of mutual friends who would say, have you heard about the Replacements? You guys are like the Replacements. Have you heard about the Replacements? And said, I heard about them. All I know is one song, the Johnny's Gonna Die song, and I like it. What can I say? And so you're sort of predispositioned to pay attention when this band might come around town. And I'm trying to remember if it was 82, 83, whereabouts the first Replacements show was, but I felt I had to see what this was all about. I also heard that chances were I was going to see this band that probably was going to suck and be horrific, but still, I just based on that one song on the radio, I thought, oh, there's something there I'm on board with here. And it was at the Rathskeller, the Rat, in Kenmore Square in Boston, and pretty packed night. And they slithered on stage, looking completely authentic in their unraveled glory, and I just didn't know how to expect it, and they came on and played Bastards of Young, which wouldn't come out for I think another couple of years on a record, but it was the very first song, and literally from that one song, 10 songs, 15 songs later, it was blazing white hot rock in a beautiful gristled sort of fleshy way, but it was white hot and smoking. And so I think what some of us who saw those kind of nights were disarmed by was just how incredibly powerful this band was on those nights. So what are these other people talking about? This band that comes on like Limp Dicks and plays shitty for 20 minutes and then passes out. It was completely the antithesis of that. And also just that everything about the guitar sound, the vocals, the song melodies, and these like anthemic, kind of compassionate sort of ways of stringing lyrics together. It was all a slam dunk of content for this kid, and obviously for everyone else in the room. You know, the irreverent nature of it all was perfect as well, because for those of us who grew up in the 70s, or, you know, from 60s to 70s buying records and buying, you know, Circus magazine and stuff, there's a, you know, an arrogance and a pompous sort of, you know, element to how these bands were carrying themselves, and this band, you know, just seemed like another answer to that. You know, it was just like, hey, you not only do you deliver the goods, but you're not buying into the shit. You know, you're not drinking the Kool-Aid either. So that was my first, you know, memories of the Replacements live, and of course, you know, like many people like me who see those kind of nights, you go home a changed person. You know, I think when, you know, the Ramones went to Europe, and you hear of, you know, Mick Jones and Steve Jones of the Pistols, and, you know, they said, you know, that was the day they made a promise to do this, because they just, you know, the world was completely different from that point onward. So so that's my first recall, and I can still really envision them on stage at the Rat in that sound, and what a awesome night it was.
What about, where did it go from there in terms of really discovering what they could do on vinyl, you know, and also, did you ever see any of the legendary Drunken shows?
Well, so after, you know, when you see the Replacements in a show like that, it's sort of an unfair paradigm to hold to them, because after that, nothing ever quite lives up to that. But still, that said, luckily, the records reaffirmed for me a spirit completely intact. From what I saw on stage that night, and when I got out and bought Hootenanny, and it was like, that's that band. You know, it was one of those deals where 9 times out of 10 back then, you would see the show and you go buy the record and you say, that's not the band I saw the other night, but you know, Hootenanny and what I saw on stage that night was exactly the same thing. It was perfect. And of course, I was in hook, line, and sinker by then, and trying not to be too influenced, because it was almost a dangerous intoxication of influence. It was, you know, if you recall Dennis Hopper, the way he's talking about Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, you know, it's this guy who just cannot, you know, tell you enough of the magic and power of this, you know, cult of personality. But I was definitely struck by that, and luckily it wasn't just a one-sided love affair of Paul. It was, you know, however these records got made and however, you know, the noise came over the speakers, there was a chemistry too. It was not, you know, Paul solo was very kind of different from the Replacements too. You know, at least when they were unbridled and unchecked and unfiltered, and nobody was getting browbeaten too much to be a certain way. It was still, you know, that's, I think you have to mention that about those early records, that there was absolutely a chemistry amongst those players making those records at the time.
Do you think the band changed a lot when Bob left?
You can't deny it. I was more than happy to stay a fan, because you know, none of the important criteria was missing, except that, you know, ready to fall off the cliff on accountability of what's going to happen next with Bob. And it was funny because I met Bob. Oh God, there was this club called Jumpin' Jack Flash down near Fenway in Boston, and it was a private show. They were doing 2 shows that week. One was at the Channel in Boston, the more official show, and then there was an unofficial party they were playing at Jumpin' Jack Flash for, I think, the WMBR radio crew or something along those lines. And Lily Dennison, who is this, you know, promoter and booker around town who really brought all the right bands to town. An awesome girl herself. She said, David, would you like to meet the Replacements? And by this time, I'm getting a little intimidated by just how big these guys are kind of occupying my musical psyche. Way, just too much. So I'm like, oh, yeah. She goes, it's easy. They're all drunk. Come on downstairs and it'll be great, So, all right. And I go down to this, complete piss pit of a, basement dressing room, and literally was introduced to Bob just as he was whipping his dick out to take a piss, and promptly, shaking his hand while the guy was almost pissing on my pants. It was one of those, like, okay, so this is, you couldn't, script this sort of thing, and, Bob won't remember me, but at the same time being like, oh, wow, I just met Bob Stinson,
Right.
I mean, I'm a guy who's their age, and I shouldn't be in this, 16-year-old crush over this band, but lo and behold, there I was, and saw a really funny show that night. It was a good show, and even the next night at the Channel, they played pretty good, and Bob ended up naked on stage, the usual stuff. But again, there was nothing that broke the spell for me, even at that middle stages of things.
Was the spell ever? I mean, I know a lot of people. The spell was broken at Don't Tell a Soul.
Well, it's funny because Don't Tell the Soul, I know how Paul regards it, and I know how lots of the hardcore fans regard it. For me, it was a fucking great record. And for reasons that maybe are hard to articulate, but I'm a big fan of bands sell out records for some reason, because I feel like you get glimpses into people at those times that can be not good, but you can also see that, I know you're trying awfully hard here to break the mold, and I'm championing your cause because of this. And the songs were still great, and it held as much sway over me because I felt like there was a guy as a songwriter coming through here, making way through the bombast and the chaos of what the Replacements had become. And I think that's where I started to articulate my own musical persona as like, we can go up there and jump around and sweat and make loud noise and get high on adrenaline, but in the end, the songs have to sort of live a lot longer. And that was where finally it was clear to me that this was a songwriter first, and then a rock guy next. And I looked at it as a sign of maturity, as something that,
Okay, then let me ask you, is for someone who says, loved everything through till Pleased to Meet Me, and could never get into that album, if you were to say, go back and listen to, what would you say? I mean, what would you say? Go back and listen to one of these two songs and say, and really just with an open mind and give it another shot.
On Don't Tell a Soul?
Yeah.
Well, what is Dirty Pool? Is that on?
No, that's Pleased to Meet Me.
Okay. All right. What's the there's that I have early Alzheimer's here
That's
when it
right.
comes to
Yeah,
titles.
I do the same thing most of the time, especially with song titles. Was Talent Show, Anywhere's Better in Here, I'll Be You?
Yep.
I think,
Okay.
if I'm
Right.
saying it right.
So what it's funny again. Why do I relate to that record so much? But I think for my time in my life, I felt a little unhealthy as well, and that I've been kind of in this world of rock and music making and using manipulating my position in a popular band to its utmost to get as high or drunk or out of my head and let the moral compass fly like it's in the Bermuda Triangle, and I felt kind of beat up and a little soulless at that point, and really, and I think there was something about the Don't Tell a Soul, where Paul's singing was, you know, very lispy, very on the edge of inarticulate and gruff, and you know, was he completely shit-faced singing the song, or was it just like raw pain of not, you know, just being inarticulate, you know, like raw pain that forces an inarticulate person rather than an articulate person. And you know, okay, it wasn't the greatest record, but there was something about it that I could relate to on a personal level, of a guy who was, you know, probably feeling about the same way, kind of a desperate character in a desperate situation. He couldn't, you know, he's literally under contract to fulfill, and is, you know, chained to this rabid fan base that just doesn't want him to change. And I just felt I could relate to it. And okay, so what are the songs? Well, good question. You know,
I just want, yeah, 'cause I mean,
it's a body of work, I guess, is
I
what it
listened
comes
it
down
again.
to.
It's not one of my favorite records.
Yeah,
It's one of my least favorite
right,
albums.
right.
And I was at a film festival up in Northampton, and on the way home, basically, I was by myself on the way home to stay awake. I was like, let me put on Don't Tell a Soul and
See.
listen it again from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And really listen. And a few of the songs surprised me. A few of them I still hate back to back.
Yeah.
But Aching to Be was just, not Aching to Be sound was a great like alt country song, which I completely forgot
It's a
about.
great song, and I remember, you know, playing that song night after night with Paul on the first tour. That song is huge. It's just, you can see it. I mean, you can read people's faces, and you can, you know, feel that collective soul of an audience sometimes. And that song always tapped into it.
The same as I do know people who think Don't Tell a Soul is their best album.
Yeah, I wouldn't
you
say
know,
best, but
You know,
it was not a chink in the armor for me. It was more of a, dude, I know what you're up against here, and I felt you know, you're doing something courageous, and you're probably feeling ragged about it, but you know, because the rumors always fly, and you hear about this and that, and when you're in a situation where no one's happy, like Someone Take the Wheel, is that on that
that's
record?
on the last one, Ultra Down.
Oh, right.
Which that really, it just seems like more like a Paul solo record.
Exactly. But there's another song on Don't Tell a Soul. I really, it's that Ghost.
I know when it's the last track.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's kind of epic.
Really nice ballad.
It's epic, you know. So, I also, it's funny too, because I'm a producer, and we're, you know, have many decades of buying records and listening to music, and you know, those you know, sounds of the 70s and 60s and production values that I think they're all great, you know, for all different reasons. But I know Paul hated a lot of the production value of that record because it was so 80s and big thunderous gated snares and all this kind of stuff. And yet, he was, you know, whether consciously or not, faced with a dilemma of like, do you think you're going to get a record to sit next to Joe Schmo's record on the radio sounding like Hootenanny or Face's record, you know, and just wasn't, you know, it was like a Machiavellian choice to, you know, hand it over to the big mixing guy. And I still kind of value it for what it is, you know. I accept records for what they are, you know, almost wholeheartedly. Mm-hmm. You know, this is, I know you probably hate it for this or that, but I'm accepting this record as it is, you know.
With while on the subject of music, what would you rank as their like best record? I mean, if like you're gonna put on one Replacements album, this is the one, or just one song, or
yeah. Well, what do people say? I mean, I still hold Hootenanny up there because it's just kind of like a perfect collection of stuff.
It's all over the place.
You know, Color Me Impressed, and you know, that kind of stuff. It's such a perfect document of a band at that time. You know, Tim, what can you say? that's a weird sounding record to me.
It's got a very strange.
That's a weird sounding record to me, and I almost slipped a notch just trying to wrap my head around it a little. It was the first time I thought, band, it's not quite that band. It's just.
If you were to ask Tommy Ramone about that record, what would you ask him as a producer?
Well, knowing both sides of the glass and also knowing Paul, both sides of the stage, I would. I have only compassion for what Tommy was probably dealing with.
Uh-huh.
And a very admirable job to get it through, because there's a clarity to the record. It's not like it's a badly engineered record or anything, but I think it really fell into the. You want to answer that, Alex? I think it fell into that sort of tacky '80s sort of thing that had to come around at that point. So, but Tommy, I. No one knows the backstory of how records get made. Nobody knows what's going on in that room, and you have to explain it to people sometimes in here. How these choices get made, or who's got the best idea that day that everyone in the room says is the best idea, and then for the next 20 years people lament that great idea is one of the worst ideas that happened that week or day. So, but I think Tim is probably one of the better records. Don't Tell a Soul I still like, although, it's been a while since I visited them. And Pleased to Meet Me, what can you say? That might be the high water mark. It just seemed to be that final balancing point of the band's pure essence to, production value and accessibility to radio, maybe.
Yeah, and you look at that album, and I almost feel there are more potential pop hits on that record than on Don't Tell a Soul.
Right.
I mean, Alex Chilton should have been a hit.
But it was too much of an insiders club matter of content.
And Can't Hardly Wait.
Oh,
greatest song ever written.
Truly, I thought that should have been. I remember Paul. We're just comparing notes on AM radio of the '60s, and Hitchin A Ride was a song we both loved a lot, and I think that's his Hitchin A Ride in a way. It just is so simple, and it just breathes, and you just humming. You don't want it to end. It's a bus ride that you just don't want to get off,
And horns on replacement.
Oh yeah.
Just like I really, I love it.
No doubt. Again, playing that song at shows with him, you could just feel the wave of humanity just all in agreement on that one.
Now, just to bring in being on Paul's first tour, here he is coming off a band that is just, so beloved. Were there songs that he did just to make the crowd happy? Were there songs that he detested doing from the band? Were there songs that he just, wow, I could play this song forever?
Not knowing him at the beginning of all that and just going through rehearsals and stuff, and then catching a glimpse that, oh wow, we're going to be doing a fair amount of replacement songs, and is it that professional performers understanding of which side of the bread is buttered or not, or he wrote them, they're great, and is he going to sing them with the same energy and feeling? And it seemed pretty evident pretty quickly that he was very proud to be playing those songs, but every night the audience was served to Paul on a silver platter, because the fever and fervor was still as strong as ever, and really waiting for Paul to deliver the next volley of Westerberg songs. It's still very strong. And I think it was hard for him to probably see how those songs might be regarded, because they were so heavily in contrast with replacement songs, and I think that was probably hard for him to think people were just waiting for the next replacement song, and especially when some of the slower, more brooding songs on the first album, 14 songs, you could just tell that some of the old cronies of the replacements days gone by were not so psyched about it, you know. But
The song that always, the replacement song that he still to this, the last time I saw him, which was probably 2005,
yeah,
is the way the crowd reacts to it is "Here Comes a Regular," where they almost
Yeah.
bring a strum out,
yeah.
you know, and it's
Well, I remember you remember hearing that song the first time too, and it was spellbinding, and it was, you know, I can still get hairs up on, you know, about it. And again, here's a guy who has such an insight into the human psyche and human dynamic, to be able to extend empathy and compassion through the lyrics of understanding that is somebody like that guy, the regular we all knew, and for many of us it was right in here. And
at least at one point or another.
exactly, and what a triumph to be able to put in a song something that binds us all together like that. Now, not everyone who heard the Replacements drank the Kool-Aid, you know. There were a lot of people who couldn't get past his voice, couldn't get past whatever. But those are the songs that, you know, had us hopelessly falling in that, you know, vortex of this is a guy who finally understands, or, you know, he was our Bob Dylan of our generation of sorts, you
Yeah.
know. And
Especially
without,
at that period.
right, you know.
Because
and-
Springsteen started going off on some, not that, I'm putting Springsteen in the Bob Dylan almost category.
Right.
I think when Springsteen is amazing, Springsteen is amazing.
Right.
But he also at times went off onto the whole, from Tunnel of Love there for 10 years.
Yeah.
What the hell happened to him,
Yeah.
you know, which was
Right.
probably about that period, yeah.
But you know, Paul was you know, for our little select demographic of musicians and music lovers and undergrounders or alternatives, whatever. He was our Bob Dylan of the time, and could make lyrics, you know, stick. Really could make lyrics stick. And I mean, we all know how clever he is and how he loves to turn phrases in that, you know, dyslexic kind of way, but still, that's all well and good as a craft, but if they still don't register somewhere on the emotional scale, it's just, it's all, you know, from some pop writing school. It doesn't have any soul, you know.
What, producing and being in the industry for so long on the inside here, what have you seen as like how the band has influenced the rock and roll today, or rock and roll even from 90s? And being in the industry for so long on the inside here, what have you seen as like how the band has influenced the rock and roll today, or rock and roll even from 91 when they broke up?
Yeah, because there's many levels of influence. Because Paul was very influenced, or you know, as a songwriter, you could really pick up, this guy is not trying to be quite himself. He's tipping the hat to all these other characters, and it was a relief to, you know, get off the I'm too cool kind of train that, you know, when you're a musician and you're reading, you know, magazines and everyone's in this, you know, ultra cool pedestal for this amount of time and that kind of time, that for a moment Paul was the ultra cool, and what was ultra cool about him was to say, you know what, nothing's that cool. If you like something, you deserve to like it, and go for it. And you know, so I think that, for one thing, he gave us all permission to indulge in the, you know, less than cool aspects of what we grew up with in our record collections. And then, of course, there was the fact that you could not shower for a few days and get on stage in ragged clothes, so you didn't have to be in stage clothes or something, that was giving us permission to redefine what was important about the showbiz aspects then, that you know, as long as you kind of made a connection and you delivered something that, you know, impressed the audience, you know, through the music or even a bad performance or something, that was good enough. That was where priorities sort of were. Now, the wannabes that, you know, just like every great band that doesn't reap the big benefits directly, but the offspring and the wannabes that, you know, refine that element to go onward and make much bigger money, utilizing the DNA of the first inspirational band. That was a little hard to take at times, and sometimes we could all cast a guilty finger to each other for, you know, wearing it on our sleeves too much. It's the ultimate form of flattery, of course, for Paul, but it must have been hard to hear certain bands.
Who do you think were the bands? Give me some names. Some very commercial bands that like have made it and like really owe way too much to replacements.
Oh God. Well, you know, the Goo Goo Dolls. I think, and you know, they were a good band. And
the first couple of
exactly. Hey, when I first started, you know, and after my glam high school Bowie, T-Rex, and Lou Reed or whatever phases, and I saw the Clash's first show in America here in Harvard Square, I wanted to be the Clash, and my next, or Jam, and my next, you know, 10 songs were absolutely that. And people still might like those songs because they, you know, were just different enough, but it's hard not to be influenced like that. And obviously the Goo Goo Dolls, you know, once the Mats kind of laid their imprint on you know, Mr. Resnick there, and you know, they did the same thing, and they made some cool records, you know, that Jed record or whatever.
Jed was great.
Fucking great, you know. But it was hard to, you know, when those ballads of, you know, not that long ago, for movie soundtracks and stuff, and you really hear, you know, that the mold of what Paul kind of, you know, sculpted in the first place, making, you know, the big bucks, and it's hard. It's and not to the virgin listener, because it's, you know, it's guiltless pleasure at that point. There's no baggage attached, but you know, it's those are the things that you just kind of, you know, the complexity of how all this stuff works sometimes, and I would never badmouth Johnny in terms of, you know, and Johnny's a good friend of Paul's, you know. I mean, it's almost like, yeah, I mean, I love this guy. It's not, he's not hiding it.
Right.
But there are others like that out there. But I just remember that as, you know, because he's still a relevant force in terms of just how far did someone go with it, you know. I mean, I thought Kurt Cobain had certainly some influence. You know, maybe I'm dead wrong, but I know in my heart there had to have been some waves made his way that also said, yeah, that's right, you do it like this, and you go from there. And
or even from the way they dress.
Oh, exactly. Again, it's a cultural imbued, you know,
like
residue.
We were talking about before. I mean, throw in the feedbacky sound of Husker Du.
That's right.
It's like, you know.
Hey, Minneapolis.
It was a great scene.
Look what we had going there. I mean, I remember playing Minneapolis for the first time, and I was scared fucking shitless just because I was like, I mean, you know, I thought I'd be playing the Grand Ole Opry or something, and opening up for, you know, it was just so intimidating on what was coming out of that city, and how powerful it just kept hitting all of us, you know, like, good God, what's next, you know. I mean, Soul Asylum after Husker Du and Replacements, it was still coming, you know. So yes, the whole, and again, that, you know, because it wasn't just the Replacements, it certainly was a wave out of that city that just, you know, set the new agenda for people. And so, you know, with Kurt Cobain, I know, well, I don't know personally, but I think I heard this story from more than one person that, you know, Courtney Love, you know, went out to Minneapolis to be, you know, next to the Replacements in every way she could find, you know, because obviously it resonated with her in such a way too. And I don't know if she was rebuffed or, you know, just realized, you know, you can't get the Paul, you know, he's he's way too, he knows you're all sick people at this point, and he has to protect himself. But, obviously, what emanated out of that band in that city, was throwing us all for a loop, and we wanted more, and we wanted to be close to that flame as possible,
Now, if you were to meet a 20-year-old today, that you were like turning him on to music, or even a musician who came in and it's like he's playing something, it's like, wow, you know where that comes from. I mean, how would you turn them on to Replacements? Well, how would you describe the band to someone who never heard them?
Someone who, well, you'd have to think, first of all, if this person, because you never know what someone's musical DNA is all about. What did they grow up on? And if you said, hey, I want you to hear something, and you play something from Pleased to Meet Me, and what's gonna win them and what's gonna not win them.
Right.
Sometimes the production thing is not gonna win them in this time frame, that's out of context. I think that it's funny, Paul's voice is polarizing for a lot of people, so I don't like his voice, and you still almost need to educate a backdrop of the time that this happened, because it's, we're appreciating it for reasons why you had to be there in a way to appreciate it. So now you're knocking it down to even fewer songs to play him, and that's when you really have to reach for, well, this is a great song, isn't it? And you would have to carefully select something that really just transcends the time, the place, the voice, and I still think you would get them. It's such an, the replacement thing is kind of an intimate thing too. It's almost like, hey, let's take our clothes off and smoke some weed and go in the pool and play some music or something. It's kind of an emotionally intimate thing. Some of those songs, like the Regular and stuff, you really feel like it's a more mano a mano direct connection. It's not always in that collective form of party music, even though Dirty Pool and stuff like that is party music. But I don't know. Do you like guitars? You like loud guitars? You like a guy who's singing like he really means it, and you like lyrics that bite you on both ass cheeks, when you think about it twice? Yeah, that's how the 20-year-old might need to be pretensed into it, I guess. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's another batch of kids who just hear it for the first time with no coaching, and they just fall in love with it the way we did, too.
It depends on the people. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm always trying to, I always make a mix CD.
Yeah.
And the first song is always Color Me.
Yeah.
Impressed, because it's just a kick-ass rock song.
Totally.
And if you like this, you'll like what follows. And
Right.
usually the last song is usually Here Comes the Regular. So
Right.
that's the way to end it.
I mean, the hardcore replacements too,
There's some,
incredibly catchy and going for the throat songs, and you might win a 20 or 17-year-old kid even through those first.
And the thing is, when you hear those again, it's funny, because I put those on again recently, just to listen again, and that they're a lot more old-time rock and roll than you think. They're not punk.
Right.
They sound like if you were updating the first couple of Rolling Stones records.
I know.
It's just, because those aren't punk riffs. This is not the Sex Pistols. It's influenced by the Sex Pistols,
Right.
but.
Well, it's funny, the Pistols were up there with Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he derived that sheer wall of power somehow at first to come by way of the Pistols, the way they just kind of, delivered it. I think the vocal, even though the voices are very different, there was still a in-your-face, attitude about how to deliver that vocal like that. And I remember on the tour bus, if we were not in a dressing room and it was one of those deals that let's just walk off of the bus practically on stage, there was either Prince's Purple Rain turned up to 11 before we went on, or the Pistols,
Mhm.
and
Okay.
and it was just, exactly how to just, get that methamphetamine musical high right before you go step on stage.
Well, even going back to the first album, when you look at the first single, the flip side of the first single is "If Only We Were Lonely,"
Right,
which was, I mean, if you said, "Oh, he's covering a Hank Williams song,"
Right.
you'd have been like, "Oh, sure, okay, I believe that."
oh, I know.
And it's, so, I mean, there was there's where you saw, this is the man who's gonna write Here Comes the Regular or Skyway or whatever.
And I think it was clever on maybe some subconscious level to deliver those kind of pairings or groups of songs. It bought him more time and more leeway as a songwriter, but I think the Replacements like to cover their tracks a lot too. They'd lead you down an alley and then quickly, hey, this alley's a dead end. Where'd you go? And end up with a song that, if only you were lonely, you'd be like, how'd I get in this other alley here?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's the mercurial nature of Paul as a songwriter, and as the band just never wanted to be that tied down to what they did last, I think that's kind of a big part of their thing too.
Which, though, in many is some of the greatest. We talk about Bowie.
Right.
What was always great about Bowie? You just did not know what was coming
Nope.
next.
You could guarantee, after a while, you knew, well, it's not going to be like the last
Yeah,
record.
until he hit with the
Yeah.
Let's Dance stuff, then we sort of
Yeah.
became the same. But
Yeah.
before that,
Oh, yeah. Talk about reinventing the wheel
Yeah, every time.
to the most
and the
grandiose
tours
gestures,
were,
yeah.
were just crazy. I mean, you look at the Diamond Dogs and what was it, the Return of the Thin White Duke tour, which is probably my favorite Bowie tour.
I saw that.
With the Walls of Light.
The white lights, awesome.
God, and opened with Chandelier. Instead of an opening band, he does the Dolly film.
Yeah,
That
and
was
Earl Slick, the beginning of that song, "The Return of the Thin White Duke." I mean, just the feedback and stuff, and incredible. Well, it's funny because there are times in all of our lives when we're hit by an artist so, the tsunami of what this artist does to us is so overwhelming, and it's intimidating, and how they open some trap door we didn't know we had, and suddenly it's just this, boundless kind of feelings, emotional feelings, just running rampant in there. And, Bowie did that for me, and, I think Paul did that for me too. And there's maybe, a half dozen or a dozen of those types in your life that hit that big. And I'm not talking about I'm not talking about the thousands of people who inspire you, but there's a lesser amount of people who open those trap doors to such a degree, and Bowie was one of them, and I will, I didn't want to acknowledge it, but I think Paul did that for me too, and to this day, even after spending a year with Paul, there's something about that character's ability to do that. It intimidates me, and even when I see him and say hi and hug and hey blah blah, blah and shoot the shit, there's still an element of me that's just the fluttering of the heart. And we toured with Bowie, with the Tin Machine band too, the Neighborhoods, and I saw Bowie every frickin' day for 2.5 months or something, and hung out with him and went restaurants and movies to Tijuana in my van for a day, but there was still that kind of hello, come on in. It's still that intimidation of, it's too. This is too big. It's too. Hey, how you doing?
Good, how about you?
Good. For
Woolly Mammoth.
yes.
Good, how about you? That's the shirt, right?
Yeah.
I gave it away.
How'd you find this place? It's not easy, right?
I knew it was up here.
Oh, you did? Did you come before?
Yeah, I knew there was like a studio up here.
Oh,
so.
good. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I know.
It's-
Same, Bowie was definitely like. For
It's
me,
too big.
Clash and Elvis probably the other two. In the
Clash. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was the first New York show at the Palladium. I don't know if we were filming
Yeah.
the tour.
And what did it do to you?
It literally just. I think that, I mean, aside, the Replacements of the Clash were the two greatest bands live I've
Right.
ever seen.
Right.
I don't know which is better because they're both very different. But I mean, probably saw the Clash about 14 times. Saw a bunch of Bond's casino shows.
Yeah.
Strummer just always looked like he was going to incinerate himself on stage.
Well, and I think we got, those little kernels of information of something big is coming, and we would get a little taste of the music and stuff, and still didn't know what to expect until the live experience.
Yeah.
And we did, I was at that very first Clash show in America at Harvard Square, and I left that place just completely
It was
unraveled.
like you never saw anything like him.
And it was a changed person. And
Same thing when I saw Costello. I don't think, I was probably about as far as I would from
was
my
this with the
stage.
attractions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Oh, yeah.
December 17th at a little place called the Oxford Ale House in New Haven, which was maybe no bigger than this room here. And he went to hit me because I was taking pictures and played no more than 40 minutes. It was the week before the Saturday Night Live show.
Yeah.
And he was just this skinny kid in the tie. And it was
Live
just
wire and
oh my God, it was just
in
pure.
prime,
Yeah.
lean and mean form.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. This is a good story about Joe Strummer. The Neighborhoods played with the Clash twice, and when we were over in London with Paul for our second trip there, I think, and a day off, went down Portobello Street in London, which is like a street where for a mile and a half, it seems every flea market type, vintage clothing store, stereos, music, all the coolest stuff in the world spills out into the street to be sold as just like a glorified flea market. And I'm like in heaven just walking up and down there, and I'm like, oh, that's so. And I see Paul Simonon, and I'm like, wow, unreal. And then I see Strummer, another 100 yards down the way. And finally I said, I'm just gonna say hi to him. He won't remember me, but he's looking through these ties, on this rack, kind of legit business ties. I'm like, hey Joe, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm from America, and I played in a band that we opened for a couple of you guys, and a couple of shows for you guys. He goes, oh yeah, what was it? And I said, the neighbors, oh yeah, Hartford, Connecticut, and Providence, right? And I'm like, wow, yeah, I think it was like, wow, pretty good, Joe. And how's it going? Oh, great. And he's holding the tie up, and he says, I'm like, that looks nice. He goes, you think the judge would like this? Oh, God, I won't even get into that. And then finally he says to me, so what are you doing here, man? And I say, well, I'm actually here. I'm playing guitar for Paul Westerberg. And he goes, Paul Westerberg. Well, I don't mean to shoot the messenger, but could you do me a favor, mate, and tell Paul Westerberg that, some people actually like the way I sing, And so suddenly I'm like, hearing a retort from Joe, who must have read some off-the-cuff remark from Paul about, maybe Paul just ultimately didn't buy into the Clash.
I've heard that.
And for whatever reasons, maybe it was like, well, that Joe, he can't even sing or whatever, and it was just one of those funny moments that between two icons, I'm in the chafe here,
And I probably rank them as the two greatest rock and roll singers. In terms of, I love the imperfections of their voice.
Totally.
That's what, where Bowie almost has too much of a beautiful voice.
That's right. He's operatic, but for whatever those guys are probably very closer than they care to admit, and that's part of the,
Absolutely. What was, do you remember, sort of like the day JFK got shot? The data replacement broke up, July 4th, 91. Do you remember when you first heard about it?
It does. I don't quite. I think everyone had expected it for so long that it was just a formality at that point or something.
Do you feel they sort of broke up once Chris left?
Yeah, it was just a sad kind of. Yeah, and Slim, who was cool, and pretty rocking, but you could just see this thing kind of being neutered along the way. You know, it just not only. I mean, Tommy was there, and thank God, you know, because he just still upheld this aesthetic of what the Replacements still represented, and he was the guy who, again, at some Midwest show we were playing, Chicago maybe, that he showed up. And I was like, wow, Tommy Stinson's here, you know, and he's like, well, we're playing in Madison the next night or somewhere, you know, we were actually going to be in the same town, but we had a night off, and I went, and he said hi, and that was probably the very beginning of what I thought, like, hey, you know, one of the Replacements knows us or something, you know. It was, and so Tommy, I think, Paul, you know, with Paul and Tommy, there was still a heart there. But the rest of it you could just see being meted out in the press and how things were kind of going. It just, you could tell it was a terminally ill beast at that point, you know, it seemed.
Well, I mean, I guess my other question is, is there anything you would want to just say about the Replacements? Just anything that we didn't cover here?
Oof, pressure's on. Well, you know, I don't know. I think there are times in your life when, whether it's an artist, a painter, maybe even a politician, a teacher, when you either stumble or direct yourself upon a real McCoy. And either you know it instantly or you realize it later, but there's an impression that's made upon you that this is so fucking genuine, and I'm looking at something that won't last forever, but right at this moment it's an indelible impression. And I think with Paul and the Replacements, and whoever that might be for other people in their lives, you can really look back and you know, who knows if I'll remember this when I'm in my dementia ward of some assisted living place, but it's one of those indelible moments and delights of my life, because I got to play with the guy for a year too. That buoy your you know, spiritual life as living on earth for whatever that amount of time was, and what you know, sort of brought to it. There's this guy, Billy Joe Shaver, who's a country rebel, kind of tragic hero of sorts down there, and he wrote a song about, you know, you'd mentioned the Hank Williams thing, and he wrote a song on one of his records about walking 20 miles on railroad tracks in bare feet to catch wind about this guy, you know, who Hank Williams Jr., who's playing at a, you know, a state fair somewhere, and what an indelible impression that made on him. And I think of that song as just for those of us who make those, you know, barefoot 20-mile walks, literally or figuratively, to these places, and we are in fact reciprocated with a real genuine article. And I think the Replacements, you know, it's always timing. It's always about timing, how those guys met, how music needed them at that exact moment in time, and they did exactly what we all had hoped, and we were a little selfish about the fact that we got it and no one else did. But it's still, when you partake in that kind of an experience, you know you were at the right place and time, and you know, it's not that it only happens once. You know, lightning does strike many different times in the same place, but for those of us who were there for that, we're the better people for it.
Good. Okay.
Excellent.
Hey, thank you very much.
Ah, good.
That was great.